Holy King, Comforter of the Spirit of Truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasure of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every impurity, save our souls of good. Amen. I'm waiting for you to land flat on this water.
Well, it's got like a loose foundation, so like, you can't help but to lean back on it.
Yeah, it's coming apart.
Yeah.
The beginning of most of my classes at CUA, they start with a prayer, and I'm always tempted to like say like the Trisagin instead, but I'd be alone in that.
I think that was it. It's the one.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, so we lost Basil.
Yeah, he's gonna run it.
Okay. You have your copy?
I didn't bring it. Yeah, we were kind of in a hurry when we left.
Do you want my phone copy?
No, it's okay.
All right.
Yeah, let's listen.
So, chapter 3 on exile or pilgrimage. There's a footnote in this edition which is very interesting. The word for exile is xenitia, which means being a stranger. And it says unworldliness, but that's not really necessarily. But it's pilgrimage, it's exile, it's living in a context not your own. So, what do you have to read?
Exile means that we leave forever everything in our own country that prevents us from reaching the goal of piety. Exile means modest manners, wisdom which remains unknown, prudence not recognized as such by most, a hidden life, an invisible intention, unseen meditation, desire for humiliation, longing for hardship, constant determination to love God, abundance of love, renunciation of vainglory, depth of silence. Those who have come to love the Lord are at first unceasingly and greatly disturbed by this thought, as if burning with divine fire. I speak of separation from their own, undertaken by the lovers of perfection, so that they may live a life of hardship and simplicity. But great and praiseworthy as this is, yet it requires great discretion, for not every kind of exile carried to extremes is good. If every prophet goes unhonored in his own country, as the Lord says, then let us beware lest our exile should be for us an occasion of vainglory. For exile is separation from everything in order to keep the mind inseparable from God. Exile loves and produces continual weeping. An exile is a fugitive from every relationship with his own people and with strangers.
So, this doesn't necessarily mean going into a foreign country. It can mean that, but it can also mean that life of renunciation, where basically you cut off all of the relationships, all of the familiar things, all of the familiar supports. If you have questions, yeah.
When Jesus invited the rich man to get rid of everything, was he inviting him into exile?
In a sense, yeah. Renunciation. Yeah. So you can be in exile in the midst of your familiar places. There's a story of at least a couple of saints who went off and became monks, and then they went back to the place, to their father's house, and lived as a beggar under the steps. And only at the end of their life did they reveal themselves as to who they were. So
When it says desire for humiliation, is that in the sense of like things that will make you humble, or does that also include being like scorned and actually humiliated by others?
It means being scorned and humiliated.
Like the holy fools?
Yeah, but not just holy fools. Because if you embrace this life, you're going to be scorned and humiliated and excoriated and cast out. And so that's just part of it. And in the when you when you take monastic vows, you actually vow to accept that, knowing full well that's what you're getting yourself into. So if you go into it, so you'll be respected, and so you can have a nice job and a nice position, and people will look up to you. You're absolutely fooling yourself.
Part of, I remember hearing that part of taking one of the schemas, I forgot which one, but like you basically, your abbot steps on you, like you're like on the ground, and like they have, I heard something about that being part of the tonsure.
No.
I don't.
No, you're prostrate on the ground
Okay.
at the feet of the abbot or the bishop. He doesn't step on you.
I've heard of. Okay. Strange. I wonder where I heard that from.
Yeah, no. Okay, keep going.
In hastening to solitude and exile, do not wait for world-loving souls, because the thief comes unexpectedly. In trying to save the careless and indolent along with themselves, many perish with them, because in the course of time the soul's fire goes out. As soon as the flame is burning within you, run, for you do not know when it will go out and leave you in darkness. Not all of us are required to save others. The divine apostle says, every one of us shall give account of himself to God. And again he says, thou therefore that teachest another, dost thou not teach thyself? This is like saying, I do not know whether we must all teach others, but we must most certainly teach ourselves.
One of the great kind of axioms of monastic life is that if you feel yourself called, run to do it. Don't wait, just go. Because otherwise, the cares of the world, it's like the parable of the sower. If the seed falls on the path and gets trodden down, or it falls on rocky soil and can't put down roots, or it falls on among the weeds, and the weeds rise up and choke it. So also is the calling to serve Christ in monastic life, especially.
This number reminded me a little bit of being on a plane, and they said if the oxygen mask drops down, put your own mask on first before you help others.
Mm-hmm.
And you also wonder, how could you possibly be able to save another person if you were unable to save yourself first?
Mm-hmm.
I had that thought. Yeah.
Okay.
In going into exile, beware of the demon of drifting and of sensual desire, because exile gives him his opportunity. Detachment is excellent, but her mother is exile. Having become an exile for the Lord's sake, we should have no ties at all, lest we seem to be roving in order to gratify our passions. Have you become an exile from the world? Do not touch the world anymore, because the passions desire nothing better than to return. Eve was exiled from paradise against her will, but the monk is a willing exile from his home. She would have liked the tree of disobedience again, and he would certainly expose himself daily to frequent danger from relatives according to the flesh. Run from places of sin as from the plague, for when fruit is not present, we have no frequent desire to eat it. Be on the lookout for this trick and wile of the thieves, for they suggest to us that we need not separate ourselves from people in the world, and maintain that we shall receive a great reward if we can look upon women and remain continent. We must not believe these suggestions, but rather the opposite.
Okay. There's some really important stuff here. One of the most basic rules about keeping yourself free from sin is don't go into places and situations which you know are going to lead you to sin. It's like if you're an alcoholic, you don't go to the bar, right? You know, if you're if you can't control yourself, don't go into a whorehouse. You know, but stay away from it. Because very often, you know, if we don't have the possibility to, or if we don't have the occasion to sin, the temptation isn't there. But once the occasion presents itself, then we so often fall head into it. And then the other thing that really plays on vainglory is to think that we can go out and as a enlightened novice of 3 months, then go back and show off our shiny new cassock and belt and hat and how cute I look, and all that kind of stuff to the people of the world, and all of a sudden be this great source of wisdom and salvation and reality. It's all just temptation.
I can't help but to think of Gandhi,
Mm-hmm.
how he would basically lie with women but not do anything, just to prove to himself, I guess, that he could withstand temptation.
Don't do that.
Well, of course not. Of course not. But I'm wondering, because it says, they suggest to us that we need not separate ourselves from people, if we and maintain that we shall receive a great reward if we can look upon women and still remain continent. And I'm wondering if that is just like a temptation, or if I'm thinking that is it possible? Is it
It's
virtuous?
temptation.
Is it virtuous to be able to do that though?
No.
To look
It's
upon people
foolery.
and not to look at a beautiful woman and not be tempted by her.
Well, that's good, but that doesn't mean that you should spend all of your time going to beauty pageants.
No, of course not. But
Seems like the idea is you don't have to go looking for temptation because it's going to come.
yeah,
no matter what.
that makes sense.
And you don't put yourself into a situation of temptation.
In Bessario, in the Tales of the Desert Fathers, there's a couple of times when some of the fathers were led by the Spirit to go into these places to rescue someone, but I believe that only the ones that were capable of doing it without falling were led into that situation.
Yeah, and even those, and they also have plenty of stories in the Desert Fathers about people who were in their 80s and thought that their flesh was virtually dead, and end up fathering a child of some nun that's taking care of them.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Really?
Yeah. So.
But it reminds me of the one story. I'm sorry to not continue yet, but there was the one story of all the fathers who were in town. I don't know, but there was this great adulterous harlot that came in known for her beauty, riding through naked, and most of the fathers looked away and covered their eyes. But then there was one that was just staring at her, and everyone was one of the fathers asked him why he was doing that. He said, "It's do you not see the glory of God and her beauty?" And it's it reminds me of that too.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
That's a very high level.
That's a
Yeah.
very high level. Don't do that.
Don't. Yeah, I would probably be one of the ones.
So, St. Benedict had
Hopefully.
to jump in a thorn bush to get to that level.
Mm-hmm. And then there was one of the Irish monks, wasn't Brendan? No, I don't know. Who used to stand waist deep in the ocean, off of in the islands off of
St.
Northern
Cuthbert
Ireland.
or someone. St. Cuthbert. maybe?
There were several of them, but
Yeah.
it was a tradition, and you stand in cross formation.
Mm-hmm.
And the legend is that the otters would swim around him and keep him warm.
Yeah. Because the water's just above freezing.
Yeah.
Water.
So.
Before cold showers, yeah.
Okay.
When we have lived a year or two away from our family, and have acquired some piety or contrition or continence, then vain thoughts begin to rise up in us and urge us to go again to our homeland, for the edification of many. And they say, and as an example, and for the profit of those who saw our former lax life. And if we possess the gift of eloquence and some shreds of knowledge, the thought occurs to us that we could be saviors of souls and teachers in the world, that we may waste in the sea what we have gathered so well in the harbor. Let us try to imitate not Lot's wife, but Lot himself. For when a soul turns back to what it has left, like salt, it loses its savor and becomes henceforth useless. Run from Egypt without looking back, because the hearts which look back upon it with affection shall not see Jerusalem, the land of dispassion. Those who left their own people in childlike simplicity at the beginning and have since been completely purified may profitably return to their former land, perhaps even with the intention, after they saving themselves, of saving others too. Yet Moses, who was allowed to see God himself, and was sent by God for the salvation of his own people, met many dangers in Egypt, that is to say, dark periods in the world. It is better to grieve our parents than the Lord, for he has created and saved us, but they have often ruined their loved ones and delivered them up to their doom.
Okay. So these last couple paragraphs. It's so easy to fall into this, this delusion that, as a young monk, having been there for a year or two, that can go back and, be as a great teacher, a great elder, and people will kiss your hand and all sorts of things. But really, that's all just temptation.
When he says, but some, he said somewhere, but some may profitably return after saving themselves. Is he opening the possibility for someone like Saint Herman going, to the Americas? He's very, like it did happen, right? That on occasion people would.
Yeah, people would return, but I think the point is they need to be mature enough to do that.
Right.
And not full of all sorts of dreams and delusions that they're going to be regarded as some kind of elder when they're really just a novice.
It's kind of surprising the amount of time the Philokalia devotes to giving warnings to monks about misbehaving and giving a bad example among the people. And because I guess that was a big problem in its day, like.
Still is.
Yeah. So.
Well, Vladimir, does this go back to the earlier mention you made of vainglory? That's one of the passions that we have to deal with.
It's one of the passions.
It never lets us go, really. So.
It never lets us go.
Yeah.
So.
So one can't be free of it entirely?
Vainglory? It's very hard. Very hard indeed to be completely free of the passions. I mean, there's some passions we'll never get rid of, which are simply bodily functions. But but learn, but it's, you know, and it's, so it's not real, it's, we can strive for dispassion, but that doesn't mean that we're going to attain it, because the church always sets the goal very, very high. It's not like the least common. It's not the idea that you can't be saved unless you become dispassionate. That's not the idea. Then there'd be no hope for anyone.
Yeah, there'd be no hope.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be Christ and his mother, and that's about it.
Would it be true that we read the stories of the saints to inspire us to go as far as we can in
Yes.
dispassionate?
Exactly. But dispassion is only one part of it, too. You know, there's dispassion, but then there's also the knowledge of God, and the dispassion is an important tool towards being able to come to the knowledge of God and the knowledge of yourself.
Does one necessitate the other?
Well, unless God reveals himself to you, the likelihood is that unless you deal with your passions, you're going to be too distracted to pursue any kind of serious spiritual discipline. Yeah.
How do you deal with your passions?
You don't fall into them. You learn how to cut them off and control yourself. In other words, not react to them. Not react to the provocations for the passions, and break the habits. Because passions are habits that need to be broken. You know, they can be physical habits, they can be mental habits, you know, of how we react to certain stimuli. And a passion is something that, it's a reaction that's become so habitual, it becomes passive. In other words, we don't even have to think about it. It's like an automatic reaction.
So if you have one of those automatic reactions and then you identify it,
Mm-hmm.
and then you cut it off, is that the beginning of quickly?
That's,
Is that the beginning of dealing with it? If
Yeah.
you do that enough, will you eventually reverse that automatic sort of passive?
right. Well, and it becomes automatic because it happens unconsciously. In other words, we're not conscious. We're not consciously reacting to the stimulus. It's become so automatic. We don't even think about it. We're not aware of it.
Okay.
But okay, when I give a talk on it, I like to talk about a McDonald's hamburger. And so say you're a novice in our old monastery up in Manton, California, 45 miles from town, on a very narrow, windy mountain road. Okay? So, and it's a Friday night in Lent, and you're there in your room with your radio under the covers, with your earphone because you're not supposed to have one, and you hear a commercial for McDonald's hamburgers, and you love McDonald's hamburgers, and so you hear the commercial, you start thinking about it, and then pretty soon you're salivating, and you can taste that McDonald's hamburger, and you really want it. You think, oh, it's Lent, I don't care. It's Friday, I don't care. I can't stand any more beans. You know, and then you think, okay, I'm going to do it. I know where the keys are. I don't have a blessing. I don't care. I know where the car is. I'll snag the car and head off. And so you go rocketing down the mountain, around the cows, around the deer, around, until you get to McDonald's. So that's what you do. And you can cut that off before you order. You can cut it off after you get it and you're looking at it and think, I really don't want this. This will mess up my Lent. Or you can cut it off before you order, or you can cut it off anywhere in the 45-minute or hour-long drive that it took to get from the monastery to McDonald's. You could cut it off before you steal the keys and steal the car. You can cut it off before you get out of bed and get dressed. It's just all these stages.
Right.
And the fathers talk about, the initial provocation, the coupling with the thought. In other words, accepting the thought to think about, and then agreeing with the thought, and then you're in captivity to the thought, because you no longer have control of it; it has control of you, and you've got a physical reaction. You've got all of this other stuff, and then it's just now in the world. It would probably mean that if you drove by McDonald's, you'd stop and get a Big Mac or whatever it is, without thinking about it. But in a monastery, it's not so easy to do that. But the point is, there's this whole process of dealing with these, and it works all the same for all the passions. We all know how lust works, right? We all know how anger works. We all, all of them. Even despondency and pride and vainglory all work the same way. Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people say that they got taught by somebody the Jesus prayer. A lot of us naively just read the Way of the Pilgrim and just started doing it. In someone teaching you the Jesus prayer, I'm wondering now if what they do is they tell you, okay, something's happening, it might be a passion, you can take a pause, you have that much control, and if you can switch your attention over to the Jesus prayer, is that the way of the monk?
Yeah. It's a discipleship. And that's what this book is about. It's about discipleship. Sorry, could you turn on the fan? It's really cold. Just one of those.
I'm just trying to think what the monk would be like if he got all the way there and he realized he didn't bring any money.
Or it was closed.
He's just panhandling outside of
That's what I
McDonald's.
said, that wouldn't stop you. You couldn't go that far, you're going to panhandle.
And the app that is
Go to
like
the dumpster.
looking for your wallet.
So in that
His
example,
clairvoyant elder, he comes back.
in that example for DK, at which point could you say that the monk had sinned or not? Or is it just a matter he's sinning more and more the further?
Probably when he swipes the car.
Okay.
And when he's listening to his illegal radio.
Well, I mean, that's not a sin. That's just a transgression of a rule. Not all transgressions of rules are sins.
How do we distinguish?
Well,
Do we come to our spiritual father and he tells us if we've sinned or not?
Yeah,
or is there
exactly.
a line?
yeah, I mean, it's one thing to transgress a rule. Like,
Isn't that disobedience?
it's disobedience, but you gotta be realistic. Is that going to cut you off from God? Is that something that is going to excommunicate you? No. Now, a bigger disobedience would be swiping the car. That's a big disobedience. Going off without a blessing. Especially, 45 miles into town. That's quite a disobedience.
I had a funny thought that if St. Paisius were the elder, like of the monastery, he would come back and you would have a Big Mac for him when he come back. Is this what you wanted?
Yeah, like the guru and
But the passions all work the same way, and that's why it's a good thing to be in a place where you're not exposed to all of these things that are, like most guys, if they're not a lot of women around, if there aren't women around, it's not an issue. It's not a big issue. It's always a little issue, but it's not really a big issue. Most guys are thrilled to death to not have lots of stuff. It's the women that like the stuff. And so some of these things. But it's the cutting off the will and combined with anger that are the two biggest passions that have to be dealt with in monasticism.
This is my first time in the Ladder. Does he talk about approaching the passions in order, with the idea of dealing with them in a particular order? Is there a natural order of doing this?
Yeah, there's an order to it. You'll see it. He talks about this one is the mother of this one, and this one is the mother of that one.
Thank you.
Okay, 13.
He is an exile who, having knowledge, sits like one of foreign speech among people of another tongue. It is not from hatred that we separate ourselves from our own people or places, God forbid, but to avoid the harm which might come to us from them. In this, as in everything else, it is Christ who teaches us what is good for us. For it is clear that he often left his parents according to the flesh. And when he was told, "Thy mother and thy brethren are seeking for thee," our good Lord and Master at once showed us an example of dispassionate hatred when he said, "My mother and my brethren are they who do the will of my Father who is in heaven." Let him be your Father who is able and willing to labor with you in bearing the burden of your sins, and your mother, contrition, which can cleanse you from impurity, and your brother, your comrade who toils and fights side by side with you in your striving toward the heights. Acquire an inseparable wife, the remembrance of death, and let your beloved children be the size of your heart. Make your body your slave, and your friends the holy powers, angels, who can help you at the hour of your death, if they become your friends. This is a generation of them that seek the Lord. Longing for God extinguishes longing for our parents, and so anyone who says he has both is deceiving himself. You should listen to him who says, "No one can serve two lords." I have not come, says the Lord, to bring peace on earth, that is, love of parents for sons, and love of brothers for brothers who have resolved to serve me, but war and a sword in order to separate lovers of God from lovers of the world, the lovers of material things from lovers of spiritual things, the lovers of fame from the humble-minded. For strife and separation delight the Lord when they spring forth from love for himself.
Any questions?
It kind of adds some context to when Christ says, he who doesn't despise family, for me is not worthy of me.
Well, he didn't say despise.
Or, yeah, leave father and mother. Or, but whereas on the surface it sounds like, well, to be a Christian we have to, literally just deprive ourselves of all familial contact. It seems like.
Well, this is not to be this is to be a monk. As a Christian, one doesn't need to deprive oneself of all familiar contact. But if you're going to be a monk, you have to restructure that. In other words, you can't be calling home every night to find out what they were having for dinner. You can't. It's not a matter of keeping up like that. You can't do that in the monastic life. But instead of deriving your identity from your family, you derive your identity from the brotherhood. So you truly become, as it says in 15, you truly become a son of the spiritual father. That becomes the source of your identity, and the brotherhood, and the discipline.
As lay people, should we just be doing a less extreme version of that, or is there some things that we just shouldn't follow altogether?
Well, there are some things you can't follow. Some of these things are specific to monks, like leaving your parents behind and all of that kind of thing. And there are different practices. For example, in a lot of the Greek churches, they'll tell a person, if you want to become a monk, you just leave. You don't tell anybody where you're going. You just disappear. And then maybe 6 months later, you can write a letter home or to your parents and tell them where you are. Now, in the Russian practice, we don't do that. It's much more. You maintain contact with your family, but you're still not living in function of your family. That's not your context anymore. You have a new context. You have a new family in Christ. And so it is also if you're going to get married. You have to leave your father and mother, and you create a new family. And if your family is too close and dominates, or if her family is too close and dominates, it's going to impinge on the integrity of your own family. And so that can be a problem. Now, it's a very good thing to have multi-generational families, but each family has to have its own integrity, because that's, in the marriage ceremony, that's what the crowning is. I mean, you're the head of your own household. So, one of the big things, especially for young monks who just come into the monastery and their parents are still living and all of that. Of course, they're going to miss their families. So that's a reality. But if they're consumed by that, if they allow themselves to be consumed by that, they're not going to work out in the monastic life. Because you can't do both. You can't do both. It has to be one or the other. Now, that doesn't mean that you cut off your family. It just means that your primary family now is the monastic community. Does that make sense? And truly, when somebody wants to join the monastery, a son or a daughter wants to go up to the monastery, the word of the Lord is fulfilled. I bring not peace but a sword. Because very often, most often, families are not very willing to lose a son or a daughter to the monastery. So,
Is that a more recent thing? Because when people used to have large families, it almost seemed like that is, like the second son or somebody was actually almost sort of at birth sort of designated for the monastery.
yeah, and for those families that, were structured like that, yeah. But it's a different thing when you're the only child of your parents and you go off to the monastery.
Forgive me for speaking, but I know I've heard that in Greece, part of it was actually like seen as a pretty bad thing to leave your family and become a monk. Even though like they're very cultural Christian, like they're like the home of Eastern Christianity basically, or like it was like if you read about Saint Porphyrios, he ran away from home like at age 14 before he could even go onto Mount Athos, and he snuck onto Mount Athos, and like he came back home and because of some illness, and they were ashamed that he'd become a monk, and he boiled his beard off because he couldn't cut it without breaking his vows, but he could boil it. Sorry.
Yeah. Actually, you don't vow to have a beard.
Do they? Oh well, they're not supposed to.
There are many. You don't make a vow. It's not a vow.
Okay.
It's a practice. It's a custom.
Okay.
But,
Interesting. What about the hair?
Same thing. It's a custom.
Interesting.
Up until the fall of Constantinople, monks had short hair. And a tonsure.
Like in the Western Church?
In the Western Church, the tonsure was circular. In the Eastern Church, it was shape of a cross.
Interesting.
So, Ladika, that's, you've raised, I mean, that is a hard situation where, for instance, the only son of a family would leave, and it actually reminds me of like the homily we had about the widow of Nain, losing her own son. And certainly if someone would become a martyr, then they're essentially doing the same thing, right? And I'm sure that the authorities would use that. They'd have the family plead, even maybe for the person to renounce Christ in order to live. But is the idea in that situation that God's going to take care of the family that are left in some way? Is that the thought?
Yeah, that's the thought.
Yeah.
Brother Andrew, could you get that apple cake? Bring it in?
Sure.
Somebody made a nice apple cake for my birthday.
When is your birthday?
I was on Sunday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you.
I know in the post, Peter and Elizabeth in Russia up until the revolution, like being a member of the clergy was kind of not very socially, looked highly upon path. You were kind of like born into it, and it was like, well, you're a clergy family, but we would never have one of our sons in our military family become one of the clergy. That's unthinkable.
Yeah, that was actually after Peter the First. Not so great.
Right. I think it was, Schwimmen or Meyendorf who kind of broke the tradition with his family and decided to become a priest, and they just couldn't understand why.
Well, but they're both from noble German, Russian, Russo-German families. So.
Peter, what you said reminded me of what I read recently in the Gulag Archipelago, which is that basically when the faithful were arrested, oftentimes it would be both of them, parents, the mother and the father, and one of them would go to the gulag and the other one would renounce Christ to just basically to like stay to raise their kids because they wouldn't want to leave their children as orphans. It seemed like such a horrible decision to make. Do I choose to leave my children as orphans or to be sent to a gulag for being a Christian? And
In that horrible situation, would God forgive the one who stayed behind or renounce Christ?
If they repent, yes. So, the idea is repentance.
it just seems like one of those things, like, that conundrum with the train where, like, you hit the lever and it's like you either kill one person or like 3 people on the track, and like either way you kill someone.
Kind of like in Silence, like the Jesuit missionaries in Japan, like they want him to renounce his faith, and they keep torturing the local Christians in front of them. Like this is happening because you just have such a big head and you won't renounce Christ.
Who did they torture?
Well, during the persecutions of the Japanese Christians in the 1600s.
That's the worst.
Yeah, like so they had like the Jesuit missionaries like watching as their flock was like tortured and murdered in front of them, and it's like, well, if you would just renounce Christ, we would stop doing this, and they've all renounced Christ, so it's like, so yeah.
It's horrible.
Kind of. It's an intense
piece of literature, Silence, and the movie was pretty good.
Because
Yeah, it was by a Japanese Catholic author. I forget his name, but it was based on the persecutions that happened in Japan. Pretty horrific.
When was this?
Andrew said he did.
It was during the mid to late 1600s, after relations soured with the Portuguese, and so the shogun just started ordering like all the Christians be killed who wouldn't convert back to Buddhism. And, but they still had missionaries go in there covertly and try their best to minister.
Shall I continue with you? Look, beware lest you cherish attachment to kinsmen, be exposed to, lest you who cherish attachment to kinsmen be exposed to the all-engulfing deluge, and you be swept away by the cataclysm of love for the world. Do not be moved by the tears of parents or friends, otherwise you will be weeping eternally. When they surround you like bees, or rather wasps, and shed tears over you, do not for one moment hesitate, but sternly fix the eye of your soul on your past actions and your death, and you may ward off one sorrow by another. Our own, or more correctly, those who are not our own, flatteringly promise to do everything to please us, but their aim is to hinder our splendid course, and then in this way drag us to their own goal. For our solitary life, let us choose places where there are fewer opportunities for comfort and ambition, but more for humility. Otherwise, we shall be fleeing in company with our passions. Hide your noble birth, and do not glory in your distinction, lest you be found to be one thing in word and another in deed. No one has surrendered himself to exile to such an extent as that great man who heard, "Go forth out of thy land, and out of thy kindred, and out of the house of thy father." And then he was called into a barbarous land that spake another tongue. Abraham. Sometimes the Lord has brought more glory to the man who has gone into exile after the manner of this great patriarch. But even if glory is God-given, yet it is excellent to divert it from oneself with the shield of humility. When men or demons praise us for our exile, as for some great exploit or achievement, then let us think of him who for our sake was exiled from heaven to earth, and we shall find that throughout all eternity it is impossible for us to make return for this. Attachment either to some particular relative or to strangers is dangerous. Little by little it can entice us back to the world, and completely quench the fire of our compunction. It is impossible to look at the sky with one eye and at the earth with the other, and it is equally impossible for anyone not to expose his soul to danger who has not separated himself completely, both in thought and body, from his own relatives and from others. By much labor and effort, a good and stable character is developed in us. But what is achieved with great labor can be lost in a single moment. For evil conversation corrupteth good habits, being at once worldly and disorderly. The man who associates with people of the world, or approaches them after his renunciation, will certainly fall into their traps, or will defile his heart by thinking about them. Or if he is not defiled himself, yet by condemning those who are defiled, he himself will be defiled.
Okay. One of the issues we have to deal with in monasticism in this day is that people are living so much longer than they did. You know, when this was written, a lot of people died in their 40s and 50s. There were still those who lived to 70 and 80, but there were many who died, quite young, and so I don't think St. John could have imagined a situation like we had a lady who's a parishioner here who's almost 80 and who brought her mother to liturgy. 5 generations in one family.
Wow.
Yeah, alive. That's almost unimaginable. In this time frame. So one of the things that we often find is that people come to the monastery, and in fact I had it myself, and then find themselves responsible for their parents later on in life. And it's not like you can necessarily just drop everything and go, because, and one of the things I feel personally is that filial responsibility is very important, and I think the Lord actually emphasized that. When he had that story about if you would if you would have how does it go? That if instead of giving to your parents what normally would be due them, you say, well, I've dedicated it to God or dedicated it to the temple. He emphasized very strongly that's wrong, and that's a sin. That we have that filial responsibility. And so, very often in the monastery, when people have to leave for a time to take care of elderly parents or something like that, that's just part of the realities of contemporary life that wasn't even considered at this point. It was not a reality that people had to deal with. But there's always the likelihood or the possibility that as a result of that, the monk who goes to take care of their parent will become so entangled in the world that they won't come back. So, the issue is attachment, though. What are we detached? Because you can still love in a detached manner. And in fact, if you truly love somebody, there has to be an aspect of actual detachment in that, because otherwise it often ends up that you try and control them and smother them, and it will destroy the relationship. But you have to, you can love, you can care for, you can fulfill your filial responsibility without being controlled or controlling that other person.
Was there a custom of elderly, especially parents, sort of going to a monastery after their careers, so to speak, were done, and then sort of be part of the monastic family?
Yeah. Say a family has a son go into a monastery, and then his father is widowed, and then his father might come into the monastery. It presents other issues, though, when you have elderly people coming into the monastery, because they very likely will need care, and unless they're bringing in resources, because they can't contribute otherwise, unless they're bringing in resources, that becomes an issue.
It was easier when monasteries had endowments from large government institutions or something.
Anybody want more cake?
Yes.
Large, small? That whole piece? Sure. Any other questions, comments on that?
There's, at the very bottom of the page where we have to be careful of condemning those who are defiled, lest we be defiled. Do we somehow inherit their defilement, or is it that we've succumbed to a passion?
We succumb to our passion of judging.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if we ended up with some Lamarckian genetic type thing. Yeah.
You remember the Lord's words, it's not what comes out of a man's mouth, or goes into a man's mouth that defiles him, but what comes out of the heart. And that's like judging others.
used that in an argument with a Mormon about coffee one time,
You know?
since they're not allowed to have caffeine.
Mhm.
Like, it's not what you put in, it's what you put out.
How does, in the cultural climate that we live in, how can one avoid judging others?
When you figure it out, tell me. Please.
Get rid of left-handed men with knives.
Well, judging is different from identifying what's sin and what's not, right?
Yes. The way that I've been trying to see it is like I recognize when others sin, but I just consider it for them like just not as bad as when I do it. I don't know how else to approach it, but I watched one of my coworkers recently like browsing Tinder, and I had a violent inward reaction to it. And, felt horrible for the rest of the day.
So, there's also a line here. Evil conversation corrupts good habits, being at once worldly and disorderly. One of the things that's really important to, I think, be aware of is the nature of our conversation. It can be a real problem, especially when somebody's just addicted to military-style profanity, but they don't give it up.
They're addicted to what?
Military-style use of profanity,
Oh, okay.
where every other word is the F-bomb, and you know, and every sentence has some kind of sexual allusion, and it's all.
I've been struggling with this quite a bit because I work blue collar.
Mm-hmm.
So, is it sinful to use a curse word?
Depends on what it is.
So, I don't want to say it. And I
To
guess
take the Lord's name in vain is sinful.
I expressly avoid that. But, you know, every now and then I'll say the F word or another word.
It's important to clean it up.
Yeah, I try, but the culture that I'm surrounded by in that work environment, it's very conducive for letting your mouth slip a lot. And I try not to be prideful, so I try to engage with the culture that I live with, but I'm having a very, very difficult time finding a balance.
Well, you just keep trying. That's all you can do.
In,
The monastery.
in more academically inclined circles that I guess would say I associate in, judging and criticizing others is a very severe temptation. You know, especially when you're discussing something online with people like, you know, David Bentley Hart came out with a new book on universalism and very heretical and problematic. But there's that sense in which, well, it would be very easy to just try and rip them to shreds intellectually, but when instead, you know, we really miss the point of it all about like praying for him because he's clearly just struggling with his faith and.
I suppose it's just different within different circles, but there's always a temptation of some sort. I'm thankful that in my line of work, you know, we dog on each other a lot, but like it's lighthearted and it's not really meant to offend either. Or like it's not meant to be judgmental. It's just like you'll start roasting someone, and then it's like we're all laughing, like everyone's laughing, which is good. But I've always been very put off by college atmospheres, and I'm thankful that I didn't have to live with that, because I find it more difficult actually than just the lax blue collar atmosphere. It's definitely harder to live a Christian life, I think, when you're doing intellectual work.
No, not necessarily.
In my own opinion, within my frame of reference, I think God places people, I guess, where they need to be more.
Sometimes dealing with academics can really test your faith and patience. In my experience.
And there's a lot of judgment and criticism that goes on. But it's all politically correct. So.
Yeah, with me it's the opposite. We're like overly politically correct, which is fun, but then it gets to a point where it's like, all right.
Yeah. So let's finish this off in chapter 25.
Concerning dreams that beginners have. It is impossible to hide the fact that our mind, which is the organ of knowledge, is extremely imperfect and full of all kinds of ignorance. The palate distinguishes different foods, and hearing discerns thoughts. The sun reveals the weakness of the eyes, and words betray a soul's ignorance. But the law of love is an incentive to attempt things that are beyond our capacity. And so I think, but I do not dogmatize, that after a chapter on exile, or rather in this very chapter, something should be inserted about dreams, so that we may not be in the dark concerning this trickery of our wily foes. A dream is a movement of the mind while the body is at rest. A fantasy is an illusion of the eyes when the intellect is asleep. A fantasy is an ecstasy of the mind when the body is awake. A fantasy is a vision of something that does not exist in reality.
No. The second line there, fantasy is an illusion of the eyes when the intellect, that's when the nous is asleep.
The reason we have decided to speak about dreams here is obvious. When we leave our homes and relatives for the Lord's sake and sell ourselves into exile for the love of God, then the demons try to disturb us with dreams, representing to us that our relatives are either grieving or dying, or are held captive for our sake and are destitute. But he who believes in dreams is like a person running after his own shadow and trying to chase it. The demons of vainglory prophesy in dreams. Being unscrupulous, they guess the future and foretell it to us. When these visions come true, we are amazed, and we are elated with the thought that we are already near to the gift of foreknowledge. A demon is often a prophet to those who believe him, but he is always a liar to those who despise him. Being a spirit, he sees what is happening in this lower air, and noticing that someone is dying, he foretells it through dreams to the more light-minded. But the demons know nothing about the future from foreknowledge. For if they did, then the fortune-tellers would also be able to foretell our death. Demons often transform themselves into angels of light and take the form of martyrs, and make it appear to us during sleep that we are in communication with them. Then, when we wake up, they plunge us into unholy joy and conceit. But you can detect their deceit by this very fact. For angels reveal torments, judgments, and separations, and when we wake up we find that we are trembling and sad. As soon as we begin to believe the demons in dreams, then they make sport of us when we are awake too. He who believes in dreams is completely inexperienced, but he who distrusts all dreams is a wise man. Only believe dreams that warn you of torments and judgments. But if despair afflicts you, then such dreams are also from demons. This is the third step, which is equal in number to the Trinity. He who has reached it, let him not look to the right hand nor to the left.
Okay. Well, that last paragraph really has, and it's we don't believe in dreams. We don't trust dreams. We don't analyze dreams. We don't deal with dreams. They simply happen, and we forget them because they're meaningless.
Does that also include like visions?
Well, part of for the most part, it's better to distrust all dreams, visions, all of that. But there are some that you can't ignore, and God implants them in us in a way so that we know there's truth there. But if you do have something like that, you don't trust yourself, and you always take it to confession to your spiritual father and let him discern whether it's for real or not. And don't hold on to it, and don't go with an agenda.
That's always been one of the more uneasy things for me about Western mystics. There's such a heavy emphasis on visions and these externalized experiences.
Yeah.
You just kind of reading someone like Saint Therese of Alaba or someone this isn't what the Desert Fathers would recommend.
I used to publish a journal called Divine Ascent, and I did most of the work for a lot of it, and it was really quite funny because in the same issue we had a long article by Saint Ignatius Brunchaninov on dreams and things like that. And he's absolutely stone cold sober. Don't trust any of it. It's all just figment of your imagination and has no meaning whatsoever. Contrasted with the life of Elder Joseph the Hesychast, who was canonized yesterday. By the Ecumenical Patriarch. So, in which it's all about dreams and visions and experiences, and it's like, whoa, these two things are so different. Different traditions, I guess, but it's much safer to go with the very sober kind of evaluation that you don't trust any of it. And all this New Age stuff of dream analysis and all of that, we don't embrace that at all. That's very important.
Is it okay to remember them just because you thought it was funny or something, or like you find it amusing, or
something like that, I suppose, but you don't take it seriously.
I used to keep a dream journal before I became Orthodox, and I really enjoyed having dreams every night and just like having these like vivid just like adventures, but not like taking anything seriously from it.
Mm-hmm.
But I
as St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, when I was a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I laid aside childish things.
Well, that was part of it. That actually started when I was working at this organic farm, and I worked with a lot of New Agers that would just talk about their dreams all the time, and like make all these interpretations, and like, oh, this had frogs in it, and it means this, or like, and they'd like, oh, have you considered this meaning, and like, oh, this means you need to get in touch with your feminine side, or something like that, So, I got very tired.
Oh, this means that you need to smoke a little less weed.
Yeah, well, that was a lot of the culture there too, but it was a lot.
of my favorite anecdotes from the Desert Fathers, I believe, is the one where I believe it's the Virgin Mary keeps appearing to these monks during prayer, and their spiritual father just says, well, just spit on her because she's interrupting your prayer. And they do, and it's revealed to be a demon.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just like, wow. You know, if it, you know, it's being distracting from your prayer, you know, it's like, you know, don't trust whatever's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If God is trying to get in touch with you through a dream and you don't accept it out of humility and with weariness against demonic attacks, He'll find some other way. But it's really our Orthodox spirituality is very sober when it comes down to it. Very sober. So, and dreams are all they're not spiritual. Dreams are fantasies of our mind.
Is there anything to learn from them ever? I have a dream that I could tell you about that recently helped me with my prayer life, actually. And basically what happened was I have a list of people, of departed people that I pray for every night, and I had been forgetting to for a few days, almost a week, and in my dream I was, it was just like, you know, I saw one of the people who I pray for who is dead, and they approached me and said, "Hey, I remember you." They're like, "Well, you haven't been praying for me. I don't think so." And then like it really like it just like kind of dawned on me that I had been forgetting, and then like I basically had this whole experience of watching them die, and like they're like basically being sent to the other side, but like death taking them over, and them dying of emphysema, which is what she died of, and like suffocating. I woke up suffocating, and like when I woke up, and like after that I was like, I'm never going to not pray for the dead.
Well, it's good to pray. It's very important to pray for the dead, and it's good that you got a reminder of that. But I think there's a little bit more going on there than.
Well, yes. I mean, I haven't analyzed it a whole lot because I don't want to. I do try to take it, you know, I try to be sober about it, but I did find something to learn from that, which was pray more.
Right. There you go.
And
It's like test everything according to the Spirit.
yeah.
See what fruit it bears.
Yeah, but the main thing is take it to confession. So, which you just did.
Yeah, in a way.
So. Okay, well, that's the end of the chapter, so we can. It's next week.
The 29th.
29th. Good, I'm here. So. And I may be here the week after that too. Not quite sure yet. So, any other questions? Issues? You want to take some of this home?
You don't want it?
Not all of it.
I'll take a piece or two.
Yeah, I like free food.
Okay. Well, let's pray. It is truly meet to bless the Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim, without corruption, that gave us birth to God the Word. True Theotokos, we magnify thee. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind, always now and to the ages. Amen.
Espalacio despota.